Welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. After US President Donald Trump met with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Finland, he was harshly criticized for his approach. Lots of politicians and observers slammed Trump for being too conciliatory, while just a few months before he claimed that he had been, quote, much tougher on Russia than President Barack Obama. Later, after Trump returned home from the summit, the White House and the State Department have reaffirmed the American position that Russia both meddled in the 2016 elections and is responsible for MH17. So how can this whole situation be explained? To discuss this, we're joined in the studio today by Maksym Yakovlyev. He's the director of the School for Policy Analysis at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for inviting.
So once again, how can this whole situation be explained? The leader of the United States, the President, Donald Trump, says one thing, and the other officials are saying totally other things. What's happening?
Well, no, I would like to start with a quote by Madeleine Albright. She used to be the head of international office, or would say the Secretary of State in the United States. So in a recent CNN interview, I would like to quote her because this is a wonderful quote. She said, he, meaning Trump, has managed to confuse everybody, but I think the thing what confuses me the most is that he is confused what he is confused about. So the total confusion in the United States policy, especially after Mr. Putin said that the couple of things that they agreed upon that he is going to be implementing rather recently. And in the United States, for the first time, they have a situation in which the top-ranked officials really don't know what is going on. So a total confusion in which the position of President Trump are really not clear. And a second situation which even adds to this confusion is that Trump says, I misspoke myself, it should be would but not wouldn't, in speaking about the potential Russian interference into US elections, which even adds to this confusion. So I use this quote to illustrate that for the first time, one of the leading world power, like the United States, within Trump presidency, is in a situation of total confusion, which is really difficult, not even to understand, but to grasp and to see where is the whole situation going to.
So how do we define what is the official position of the United States of America towards Russia and towards what Russia is doing in Ukraine, for that matter?
It is really interesting because we, from our Ukrainian side, are really interested in the situation because we would like to know if there were any kind of agreements about Ukraine without Ukraine participating. We would like to know about it. So since Ukraine is now interested in asking the United States what exactly decided upon, we have to understand that in America they don't know what the decisions are if there are any agreements. So for Ukraine it is important to understand that official United States position, and we have to understand that it is not Russia. In the United States, Mr. Trump is not the state in itself.
Exactly. So he's not the only one making the final decisions. He's not the only one to ruling the policy course of the country. That's why all of this confusion is kind of anticipating and interesting, and also fascinating from a political point of view, because we can see the Russian reaction. There's a certain degree of misunderstanding from the Russian side, because for Russians, they had the leader Putin, and if he said something, it should be immediately implemented. Now, for the Russian side, it is impossible, both historically, and there's a long discussion, debate, how come it is like this, but the Russians really don't understand. When the president comes back to home, to his country, he's not the country in himself, so he has to explain the whole country system. But for Ukraine, the United States have reassured us that they're not trading with Ukrainian interests, so that we are part of this whole negotiation project. How can we be sure about that? How can we be sure that Donald Trump, being what he is at the international arena at this very point, did not sell Ukraine out? I'm sorry for the harsh words, but...
Well, unfortunately, I have to say there are no guarantees that we are not sold out and that we are not, because many observers really note that the whole case of Ukraine is really something that stands in the way of a better agreement between Trump and Putin.
Yes.
So this is a very unusual situation in this, but a number of reassurances, because selling out Ukraine would not improve United States international standing in many ways, because what Trump says, sometimes he's very interesting what he says. For example, he many times referred to NATO as being obsolete as an organization, but now he says that NATO should be stronger and somehow because to be a superpower, one country really needs a strong alliance like NATO. And then I would like to quote the German source, Spiegel Online. They said that this meeting was one of the journalists from this point. He said that this meeting was kind of that both parts, they kind of assured the death of Euro-Atlantic cooperation with the meeting. So we have to say that for Ukraine, it is not only about Ukraine, it's also about security in Europe. Because if NATO backs up and if NATO is really obsolete, it's not only about Ukraine. We can speak about Montenegro and their reaction, because they really reacted saying if it is possible to come to World War III with the Montenegro participating, then the European parts and Europe are really strong about uniting. President Macron of France said, if we're going to have like 6 or 8 countries, he said, we're going to unite our forces and to have our own defense. So Ukraine has a lot of options to look for, but it is not the end, so to speak.
Okay. Well, you know what they say, that the Third World War is not going to be happening with bombs and rifles. It's going to be happening in the information arena.
With cyber attacks.
Cyber attacks and propaganda, which Kremlin is really active at right now. And Ukraine is trying to protect itself. And the cybersecurity issue has been on the agenda of various summits, of various meetings. Do you think that Trump and Putin discussed that?
You know, I think if somebody hacks Trump's Twitter account and tweets something differently, maybe that would draw attention of this person to the cybersecurity matter, if something like that happens.
Are you saying that Trump is not interested in cybersecurity?
Potentially, maybe he does not have the comprehensive understanding of how important this issue is. Therefore, I'm doing this very blunt example to illustrate if something like this happens to him personally, because even in his speeches and his discourse is something referring to very personal matters. You know, maybe one thing, he really does not understand the full scope of Russian involvement, like, you know, trolls factories and stuff like this. Secondly, I have to repeat myself that the United States is not only one person, like president, compared to Russia. There is the whole system, and within the system, there are many people who are aware of how important cybersecurity is.
What about the situation when Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election of the United States of America? How much impact did that meddling have on the election outcome, on the results of the election?
Well, as political scientist, I would abstain from commenting on things that are within criminal justice and things like that, because there are many experts who are doing the research and investigate this issue.
Why does it take so long then to actually prove the fact that everybody's talking about, that Russia did interfere in the election process?
You know, it was very interesting. One of the very first reports by the Netherlands on MH17, there was an interesting, in Dutch, and very short video, which is really online, everybody can watch it on YouTube, when one of the principal investigators says, this was where it happened, how it happened, and then the journalist in Dutch asks, so is it the Russian side? He says, I told you about all the details, but it is not in my power to draw conclusions. So it is interesting. I would say that in the United States, there are many different parties, but once somebody should at the end say, yes, we concluded that there's Russia's fault, and maybe there's also a lot of politics involved, why nobody is really speaking out loud saying this is Russian involvement, we have the proofs, it should have an impact on our bilateral relations, and this Trump's move to have this détente with Russia to come to terms and to improve our relations, we should clear this matter. So my point is that probably there is not enough political will, as we use in Ukraine, we misuse this term a lot. But in Russia, there must be a person who comes and says, yes, we now concluded, we have a lot of evidence and proof, it is like this, and we have to think about protecting ourselves from Russian potential interference in future and upcoming elections.
What if that happens in Ukraine? We have elections coming up, and we have double elections coming up, the presidential and the parliamentary one. Well, how do we protect ourselves?
Hopefully, because you know, the positive thing or the very negative thing happening in the east of Ukraine with the annexation of Crimea and the war ongoing in Donbass with Russian support. The positive thing is that we improved our military capacity and defense. We are improving, so this is a positive thing. Within the upcoming election, there's a definite thing that Russia would not try to openly support any of the candidate. So political analysis in Ukraine speculate if there might be a very pro-Russian candidate. This might happen if Russia would not openly, but anyhow, support a couple of pro-Russian candidates in Ukraine. But we all understand this is political death for a presidential candidate to come up with open support for Russia in Ukraine. And that is leading to a question, which was a very good question, because in a situation like that, when Russia cannot openly support a candidate, any type of cyber interference, using internet and social media, using fake news to support a particular candidate, that requires Russia to be more, let's say, intelligent and accurate in the influence upon Ukrainian public opinion.
But still, can we defend ourselves from that?
Well,
Can we educate our citizens enough for them to be, knowledgeable enough not to buy that, not to believe that propagandistic information?
And another good question of yours, because I think Ukraine has done a lot to improve the awareness of our population. Like, Stop Fake is really a well-known resource, and I'm really grateful to my colleagues both from Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and from Lviv School of Journalism, because they cooperate. This is a huge and interesting project. One. For the second thing, a lot of Ukrainian public opinion surveys indicate that Ukrainians are now very skeptical about any type of news and any type of media. So Ukrainians now listen to different news, compare, and they're not that gullible as they used to be. So there is a certain improvement.
Are we talking about people residing in mainland Ukraine? What about those who live in occupied territories, in temporarily occupied territories and illegally annexed Crimea?
Well, this is a good question, because it is really difficult. As we know, one of the first steps with these groups in so-called self-proclaimed republics, what they did, they really tried to block Ukrainian news, and they use very intensively this propaganda style. And we have to say that this is like back to the USSR.
That's even worse.
Yeah, that's in many respects, yes, this is true, because they come up with a lot of fake news. But this is comparable with the United States, which is very important for Ukrainian media to broadcast this point that fake news is not an opinion. If you're lying, you're not projecting an opinion. This is fake that, for example, never happened. Like Slavyanska, the boy who was crucified.
Oh, yeah.
This never happened. This is not an opinion. This is fake news. And what is important for Ukrainian side to show that we operate with facts and figures, and we try to debunk all these fakes and to show to the population. But it is really difficult within the occupied territories with the population.
That's why I'm asking, because they are deprived of the flow of information that people in the mainland Ukraine have. How can we help those?
First, I think counter-propaganda, or propaganda like reverse propaganda, is never a good idea from my point of view.
I agree.
Even though some Ukrainian media sources tried that, it didn't work out. So I don't support this idea. Secondly, we need access to this population. So if we speak about this idea, like coming back to this Trump-Putin agreement, potentially about elections in Donbass, we have to say that no Ukrainian political party would be risking their lives physically to go there and to speak for their parties and
How high are the chances that the elections will actually be organized in those temporarily occupied territories?
Well, at my university, I teach a great deal of statistics and research. So when we speak about probabilities, it is possible, but now highly unlikely because it's really dangerous. But answering your question, I hope that in the future, at some point, we'd arrive at the position when the border is secured by our forces. I mean, Ukrainian and Russian border. This is something the Russian side is really against. So we have the border control. There is no military. NATO final resolution said that Russia should withdraw its troops and support, because we now understand that this is impossible. It is not a civil war. There is a certain presence of Russian military.
War.
It is a hybrid war. So once we have access to this population, once this area is secured, that's why military security and defense is so important. And then it's a very slow process to tell these people that this is wrong, this is fake news, this is not opinion. Because opinion is something political we can discuss, but when we're lying about facts and projecting fake news, this is something totally different.
Let's talk about Minsk agreements.
Nice turn.
Yeah, let's talk about Minsk agreements. Russia, being a part of the sides who signed Minsk agreements, is the one who is violating these agreements on everyday basis. Why is there no reaction from the international community?
Well, one thing I would like also to stress is this: even at this Helsinki summit, Putin is so, I would say, arrogant or self-confident to say that the international powers should put more pressure on us, on Ukrainian side, from our side, to implement this agreement. So we both understand what the Russian side speculating and also misusing this information on foreign, because I travel to Europe regularly, especially in countries like Germany, Austria, a lot of discussion like, but you agreed to have the election. So we can really play with the points, which point comes first. And even to Europeans who have this idealistic understanding of elections, which is good, because the Western democracies, they work fine, the people don't understand.
They're transparent.
They're transparent, exactly. They work fine because not a single European politician would imagine even campaigning in a military-occupied territory, which is physically impossible because it's dangerous to one's life. So Russia is misusing this agreement to show that, but they should have elections first, then we can think about withdrawing our troops and securing the border, and then probably international observers might come, or like, I don't know.
This looks like flirting. Ukraine has fulfilled so many obligations, and Russia is coming up with, new requirements all the time. This is not fair.
It is not fair. And it's also not fair that from Ukrainian side, we don't have on our side. Unfortunately, there are different ways how we can reintegrate these regions, but we have to be honest that in Ukraine, we have open political and democratic discussion on how to integrate. Like, Mr. Avakov's plan to integrate the territories. But it's good that we're now discussing the red lines, something that we cannot negotiate, like that the borders should be secured, like that there should be no pardon automatically, even to all people who committed very serious crimes and military crimes and who killed and murdered Ukrainian soldiers. So there are many things to discuss, but we have to, on Ukrainian side, we are within this political process of discussing on how we should reintegrate these regions and people.
For a second, let's just imagine that Ukrainian government goes for it and organizes elections in the temporarily occupied territories. And these elections go and they select a leader and whatever. Does this mean that the conflict would be over?
Good question. I think once some Ukrainian political parties or even powers agree to this thing under current circumstances, there would be another conflict. Because the many Ukrainian it is really difficult, because I think this reaction with Montenegro and this reaction of Putin, what he said about potential membership of Ukraine and Georgia in NATO, says that Russia still thinks within the imperial borders. And
exactly. They think of themselves as the empire. They think the way that they do have the right to rule their neighbors.
And I would like to quote a former president of Bulgaria, Mr. Plevneliev, who said to a German, if I'm not mistaken, it was Frankfurt Allgemeine. I really love quoting him, because he said, that Bulgaria and Russia, they have traditionally had a good relationships. But anyway, he said that Russia thinks in terms of empires of the 18th century. For them, there are no partners, there are only vassals. So the people who are really subordinate to the will. It is really difficult to negotiate something with this. So my point is that for Russia, it's important to have representatives of the region. Some even call this plan or this scenario Chechnya scenario. If they provide somebody from the local these republics, from the elite, somebody with whom Kyiv would be kind of okay to represent these territories. But then within our parliament, and this is also in Novakov's plan, we can really criticize it, but it says that membership of this kind of republics or the political parties they might select, and elections there, they were all a total farce, if you know. The communists in Luhansk Republic were not registered because they did not submit the documents in Ukrainian. This was an official excuse, which is on the brink of insanity. But anyway,
agreed.
But anyway, if they elect their representatives to Kyiv, and these groups would block our membership and the potential membership, even not talking about perspectives, but if this group would block Ukrainian direction to the European integration or membership in NATO, there's a good question why we would like to reintegrate them. It is really difficult to say, but then there should be normal representation if we know that how many parties are in this so-called republics. From so-called parties, there were like 2 blocks running for the seats. This is not normal. And in the last republic, there were like kind of fake parties, but only 3 of them. There is not little real political process going on there. So this is...
I agree. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for telling us. This was Maksym Yakovlyev. He's a director of the School for Policy Analysis at National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV for more.